effect of a criminal conviction on a young person can alter the trajectory of your entire life.
This is an election that could have been avoided. A lot of money could have been saved.
I was unhappy that they decided to put my friend and colleague Bill into the 9th. Bill's always represented the 8th.
We took on the powerful special interest.
Around the state, the energy has just been building and building and building.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I am Richard French, and thank you so much for joining us this Tuesday evening, June 5th. A lot to cover this hour, but first up, an issue we addressed last night and will address all week long. I'm talking about stop and frisk. New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo made a pretty surprising announcement yesterday that could effectively decriminalize small amounts of marijuana when it comes to New York. And we'll explain how this proposed measure could impact especially minority communities, and my contention is for the better. And next we go across the river to New Jersey, where you've got a political showdown tonight. Two former friends, or at least they say they were, two Democrats in Congress now forced to face off against one another for one job. We're going to have the extended coverage of this closely watched race. And later, we head out to Wisconsin, where the word of the day is recall. The governor of Wisconsin facing a tough battle tonight to hold his seat from a Democratic challenger. And it's not just about one race, but what this tells us about the power of labor, about also the power of unions, and also about the power of, let's just say, money in 2012 from all different sources. What this will mean for the November elections, we'll dig into that. And then religious law, well, we will revisit an insular religious community located only about 30 miles from New York City. And trust me, after you see this story that was just recognized for an award by the Associated Press, you'll understand how many believe it's like you're stepping into another time. All that and much more is coming up on this edition of RFL, but we begin with stop and frisk and the governor's big announcement yesterday.
There was a blatant inconsistency. If you possess marijuana privately, it's a violation. If you show it in public, it's a crime. During the stop and frisk, the police officer says, "Turn out your pockets." The marijuana is now in public view. It just went from a violation to a crime. The effect of a criminal conviction on a young person can alter the trajectory of your entire life. Commissioner Kelly's response to the New York City Council, I think, was right. The problem is the law, and the solution is change the law.
Well, that, of course, Governor Cuomo yesterday, and after sitting out or sitting on the sidelines largely on this issue, he decided to get in a big way. Some say an historic announcement. He was essentially saying decriminalize small possessions of marijuana, and it's not just about marijuana, his decision. He's proposing cutting the penalty for public possession from misdemeanor to a violation, a change that could tamp down on the NYPD's controversial stop and frisk policy. Now, stop and frisk, as many of you know in the city, this refers to a policy of confronting a person that police determine by their own yardstick is quote-unquote suspicious looking, and then patting them down in an effort to prevent a crime from taking place. Now, during this frisk, the quote suspicious looking person ordered to empty their pockets, an action that essentially causes the potential pot possession to become a misdemeanor. Now, if the marijuana had stayed in the pocket, it is only a violation, and trust me, that's a big difference when you're talking about a criminal record. Stop and frisk disproportionately, we'll get into the numbers, impact minorities and minority communities. Now, take last year. In 2011, the NYPD reported well over 600,000 stops. That's just the recorded number, and that would be a record. Stops have increased by 600% since Ray Kelly took over as the NYPD commissioner. 84% of those stopped, they were in Black and Latino communities. Now, two major New York figures, both Mayor Bloomberg and Reverend Al Sharpton, have at least tepidly thrown their support behind what Governor Cuomo had to say yesterday, with Bloomberg, who's been a staunch defender of stop and frisk, saying the measure strikes the right balance, and Sharpton, who's been a huge opponent of the practice, calling for the governor to go even further. Now, I'm joined now by a guest who certainly is very invested in this subject, Darius Charney, an attorney who represents plaintiffs in a class action lawsuit against the NYPD over the stop and frisk policy. And Darius, thank you very much for a few minutes. And as I said yesterday, while what the governor said was significant and everybody weighed in, we're talking about a small fraction of the much broader population that stop and frisk is affecting. We're talking about 50,000 out of the close to 700,000, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah, explain to everybody, and we're going to bring in the audience's reaction throughout the show. We're going to talk about things like furtive movements and stuff that, you know, hopefully by the end of the hour, people say, wait a minute, what's going on here? But put a human face on this, and we'll introduce the audience to some people directly that this is impacted, but you're representing more than a few plaintiffs, and a lot of people are invested in this case. Why are so many people so concerned about a policy that has affected literally millions of people here if we go back just a few years?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, this practice that the police department has been engaging in now for more than a decade is really impacting hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers every year. And in certain communities, this is happening to people multiple times a week. You know, there are kids who are going home from school and, you know, 3-4 times a week are being stopped by the police, asked to empty their pockets, asked where they're going, patted down, and in some situations having force used upon them. And so this is a practice that is really impacting certain communities very severely. It's causing a lot of fear and distrust of the police, which is really sad when you think about it, because in order for the police to really fight crime successfully, they need to work together with the community. And if the communities you're policing don't trust you, it makes their job a lot harder.
Now, when people on the outside look at this and they don't have a law degree like this, says, well, wait a minute, you have a basic right to privacy in America, and walking down a city street doesn't qualify you as a suspect where you don't have to spread them basically in public view in front of your family, friends, and everyone else. How is this legal? This has been addressed a few times, and basically the NYPD was given the benefit of the doubt by the courts to say, just basically clean up your act here a little bit and use better judgment. It didn't work out too well.
That's absolutely right. You know, there was a lawsuit that my organization was involved with about a decade ago that there was a settlement that was entered into with the police department in 2003. And under that settlement, the police department promised to do certain things. Essentially, they said, trust us, we'll fix the problem. And it was left up to them. There really wasn't any mechanism for enforcing, you know, what they were supposed to do or to check to make sure they did what they said they were going to do. And lo and behold, you know, 5-6 years later, as we look at the practice, you know, it exploded. Basically, it increased, as the statistics showed, about 600%. And the racial disparities have persisted. They're severe. And the other piece of it is that the police department, you know, says that what they're trying to do here is get guns off the street, which is, I think everyone would agree, is a laudable goal. Yep. But, you know, 99% of these stops, they don't find any weapons, you know. And so the question is, why do you need to stop 600,000-700,000 people if all you have to show for that is 800 guns? You know, 800 guns is a big number, but it shouldn't take you 700,000 people to get that many guns.
So we've been talking about this issue, and you've been living this issue, and your clients have experienced this issue for years in New York. But there's been a potential major break, and it's really because of the case you brought. You went before federal district court here, and the judge granted you class action status. And while many people say, well, what does that mean? Yeah. Explain the significance of that. And she, in a withering opinion here, took the NYPD to the woodshed and said, among other things here, you're making this up as you're going along here. You're doing profiling pure and simple. And probably the most damning is, she said, and the directors are coming from the top level of the NYPD. She left no gray area as to say, you, the police, you laid out your case here, but when it's all said and done, you're not only you're joining in this practice, but you're basically aiding and abetting it and giving it direction. You probably couldn't have written an opinion better yourself.
Yeah, I mean, we were very pleased with the decision. I think that's a good way to put it. I think the key, as you pointed out, is that she identified that the problems here really emanate from the top, from the central administration of the police department. This is not a situation where you have one or two rogue officers or a particular precinct where maybe a precinct captain is, telling his officers to do illegal things. This is a systemic, department-wide problem that emanates from the top. It affects every precinct in the city and therefore impacts communities all over this city. And so our class of plaintiffs is a citywide class. It's anyone in the city of New York who in the last 5 years either has been or is at risk of being stopped without reasonable suspicion, which is what's required under the Constitution, and on the basis of their race, and which, if you're stopped because of your race, that also violates the Constitution.
To just give you a quick sample, when we come back, we'll give you more of the detail on this, and also you're going to hear yourself what one police commander told his guys before they went out, so you can hear about and hear for yourself the practice, and also hear from a person who was literally profiled himself, and not just once, but multiple times asked to spread him by the NYPD. But this is what the judge had to say in her conclusion. She said, the NYPD is engaging in a widespread practice of unlawful stops. An injunction seeking to curb that practice is not a judicial intrusion into a social institution, as the cops argued, she said, but a vindication of the Constitution and an exercise of the court's most important function, which is to protect individual rights in the face of government malfeasance.